Welcome, everyone. Thank you for waiting. We're going to go ahead and get started. So first, I would like to thank Ambassador Chiambori and her staff for hosting us here today, Mr. Mel Foote and CFA staff for bringing everyone together for this roundtable. I'd also like to thank the panelists for sharing your perspectives on the next generation and our involvement in bringing the diaspora together and moving forward as leaders of the next generation. And then the audience for being here, part of a much needed conversation to bridge the gap between the current thought leaders in the diaspora engagement and the next generation. As we continue to see the rising of Africa and the continued struggle of our people to organize, I think now more than ever, it is imperative that we, the next generation, look to those in leadership positions now for wisdom, but also to look within to create our own narrative. The use of our out-of-box approaches and unconventional ways to bridge the diaspora, to re-energize our people in areas of democracy, in areas of health, governance, trade, education, and investments, et cetera. But most importantly, to link, to become one voice, to make actionable steps that speak for themselves. So there won't be a question that Black lives matter, that African diaspora lives matter. From today, our collective actions as the next generation should serve as a ceremonial changing of the guards to become one voice, to organize, to be the unified drivers that Mother Africa needs to continue to rise. And with that being said, I want to turn it over to Mel for welcoming remarks and immediate for Janine to introduce our speaker.
Yeah, good afternoon. Certainly want to say hello to everybody. I want to say special hello to Michael Sudakasa, my brother from another planet, you know. But Michael is one of the most brilliant people I know, especially on private sector development. And we worked together. Mike wrote books and all this kind of thing, took his family and went to South Africa 15 years or so. And he's been there working on the continent, but one of the most qualified, competent individuals. So I want to say hello. I don't make a move in Africa without consulting Mike. But this is really a special day for us. We're really excited to have our keynote speaker here. I've been listening to his music all for the last couple of weeks. I've been posting it. He got this cut called Bambi, and it just stays in your head. You go to sleep, you're still hearing this stuff and the way it's performed. But we're excited to have him. I've been hearing also his lecture, his discussion around some of these topics that face the next generation, and I think it's right on the mark. CFA is committed toward that. We've always been committed toward raising this next generation. The Young African Leaders Initiative, it came from us. You know, we're the ones that came up with it. We gave it to President Obama, and they wanted to know what they could do to, buy time because of the nature of the country in 2008, and we suggested that he focus on, don't spend your time on Mugabe and Biya and Bashir and those old guys. Focus on the ones coming up, this next generation, and he did that, and I think it's the right message. So we have got to be serious about engaging this next generation. All of these challenges that we faced on the continent today are with us, you know, be it climate change, be it terrorism, be it lack of economic opportunity. You got this youth bulge, you got 60% of the population in some of these countries under 20 years old. If we don't take this stuff seriously, Black lives won't matter here, they won't matter in Africa, they won't matter anywhere. So I think the time is now for us to have this discussion. So I'm really excited to have Jidenna with us and looking forward to it. So with that said,
again, everybody. I had the pleasure of first hearing Jidenna in New Orleans, which happens to be my hometown, and we spoke early this morning about the role of younger people doing positive things. And when I listened to him, it was at a group of leaders, actually it was NBA players, it was NBA Africa event. And I said, gosh, this is a call to consciousness and a call to action. So please bear with me. He has a remarkable bio, and I wanted to present it entirely so that you can appreciate the person from whom you will hear in a few minutes. Cutting a path of his own through the landscape of contemporary culture, Jidenna's rise to acclaim is a story familiar to some, belonging and not belonging, navigating the world by reading between the lines and learning to harness the power of being comfortable with crossroads. To any child of the African diaspora, Jidenna's story feels like an echo of their own journey, but it is a tale that anyone can identify with, making meaning out of the uniqueness of your own experiences. With an origin story that spans continents and coasts, Jidenna's man-about-town swagger and global appeal balances the debonair edge of James Bond with the consciousness of Muhammad Ali. Jidenna moves with poise and purpose on and off the stage, delivering personal narratives and commentary on the world's state of affairs. A natural-born leader, he embodies the role of a modern-day chief, the African version of a Don. Jidenna spent his formative years in Nigeria and emigrated to the United States with his mother to be greeted only by culture shock at every run. Humble beginnings stateside gave way to a personal triumph as Jidenna earned his way into Stanford University, where he connected with like-minded, free-spirited souls and created Fear and Fancy, a social club comprising of entrepreneurs, activists, educators, and artists. After Stanford, Jidenna and some of his Fear and Fancy collaborators were instrumental in spearheading educational initiatives in California and New York that brought together coursework and hip-hop to invigorate and empower students to take on standardized tests with confidence. Creating a sound all of his own, Jidenna's music effortlessly collides genres and eras, uniting bright EDM and high life on one song and bouncing trap beats under the smooth Nat King Cole vocals on another. His versatility as an artist is grounded in the diversity of his background, the breadth of his influences, and the exacting approach that he's honed over time. This colorful soundscape connects the dots between the sounds of the African diaspora, past, present, and future. On his debut album, The Chief, released in February 2017, Jidenna exhibits a relentless sense of exploration of the arbitrary boundaries of rap and R&B, creating an expressive document that is as honest about urgent social political issues as it is about turning up. Receiving the critical acclaim for sources like Spin, The New York Times, New York Magazine, and garnering respect from outlets like XXL, The Chief is a definitive statement that rewards repeated listens. Fatefully connecting with Janelle Monáe during time in San Francisco Bay Area at a legendary Fear and Fancy masquerade, Jidenna signed to Wonderland Records, Epic, in 2014. From his Grammy-nominated double platinum smash hit Classic Man to harder tracks like Long Live the Chief and the love-lost balladry of Bambi. Jidenna has cultivated a diverse fan base of generals across the world who turned out in full force for the sold-out Long Live the Chief tour in 2017 that took Jidenna and his backing band, the Knickers, all over North America. From notable guest appearances on hit shows like Luke Cage and Insecure to picking up Soul Train Awards, Best New Artist Award, and working with First Lady Michelle Obama on higher education initiatives, one thing is clear: Jidenna is deliberately enacting only his 100-year plan, and this is just the beginning. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Jidenna.
Well, first of all, thank you all for the royal welcome, the amazing introduction there, and the amazing words and affirmation and the conversations we've already had on and off stage. And I want to thank all of you in front of me, especially those older than me, the elders in the building, for putting the hard work before us. I'm truly honored to be part of the Constituency for Africa, a part of the Ronald H. Brown series, and it's a high honor for me to take this podium and be here with you all. Those of you who are policymakers, those of you on the ground, on the front lines, it's a high honor. I know my father, peace be upon him, will be proud that I'm sitting here with you all. So thank you all. And I would like to ask for permission with all the elders in the room to speak freely. Do I have your permission? All right. You may not have wanted to say yes to that, but you did. I'm dead ass. You may not have wanted me to say it. But the thing is, if you don't say yes, then I won't speak freely. This is a remarkable time that we are living in today. When I first came to this country, my first day of school, I was called an African nigger and punched in my belly. Because when I read the ABCD, EFG, HIJK, I said 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, they laughed at me. But now, when I walk in the room and I'm walking the red carpet with other rappers, French Montana from Morocco, When I walk around with these guys who may wear traditional outfits, it's actually cool. It's amazing now that we go from African booty scratcher to some of our music being #1 records on the radio or on the Billboard chart. So that's a huge transformation, and I think that's a testimony to a lot of the work you all have been doing for a while, and also a testimony to our generation as well. So I'm going to be brief because I want to make sure the panelists have their time, and you all are the experts. I'm just an artist now. I may be wrong. I don't know. I don't know anything. So I thank you for the biography, and I think that was a little bit of my life. I think the rest of my life has been, for better or worse, haunted by my father's parables and proverbs. So I'll start by giving one. My father, who came from Nigeria, where I grew up until the age of 7 when I moved to Boston, Massachusetts, he used to tell me many things, and because he was a product of his times and the Biafran War, on which side he fought. And this is not, I know that's a controversial statement with the Nigerian government and other representatives saying that Biafra is a terrorist group now. The time, I can't speak on that, but I can speak on my father's generation. The flag of Biafra is red, black, and green with a sun in the middle of it. So despite what people may be doing or people may not be doing now, at its core, even in its flag, you find the dream of Marcus Garvey. At its core, with the light of the sun in the middle of it. And so, since I was young, he's been penetrating my mind and making sure that I was aware that my duty in this life, and I have devoted it ever since, is to build this bridge between the African diaspora. I want nothing more than to see our people across this world move as one. Nothing more. I was just visiting my mom in Boston, and there's a street called Dorchester Avenue that used to be predominantly black, right from around my mother's house or nearby, all the way through closer to downtown Boston. Now, with gentrification, that's all changed. And I was asking my homie, what does it look like now? And he said, well, it's a lot of Vietnamese and Filipinos, mainly Vietnamese on the street. I said, okay, well, how do they keep their houses? He said, well, in Boston, you have 3 floors. We call them triple deckers. And each floor is usually a different family renting out an apartment building. He said the reason why the black people on Dorchester Ave lost their house, or their apartment rather, is because they were fighting against gentrification one family at a time. But the Vietnamese were families that didn't know each other before, but they pooled their money together if they lived in the same building. And that way, they were able to preserve their housing. Now, with that said, my friend who was updating me on the state of Boston had a look of despair, a look of just a lack of hope in his eyes. And I said, no, it's no problem, bro. You see, I firmly believe that we are in the dark ages, unfortunately, but we're coming out of it as a people. And the reason why that actually gives me hope to say that is because the Dark Ages has a deadline on it. It's a time period. We have to remember that Europe faced the Dark Ages when we probably had the opposite. We had a golden age on the African continent. So that means that there is a clock, a timer, as far as how long this lasts. Our job right now is to bring it to a new golden age. And the only way you come to a golden age is by remembering who we are. And this is the point where I feel like it's a generational thing that I'm seeing in a shift and a transition. When I was taught about the 1970s, that black people in this country would change their names to Kariba Kunta Kente Ibn Atad Ahmad. they would change their names to African names. I think that was a start, and they were very courageous in doing that. But as we move to my generation, what I'm seeing, and one of the most important things that we have to remember in the African diaspora, is not necessarily changing our names, but it's knowing where we're from, and it's knowing that we can travel there. Because what we do is we go and we do that. Where's my phone? We do this. And we show, hey, man, we in Paris. Yeah. Hey, man, we in the Bahamas. Yeah. Hey, man, I'm living large, man. I'm working out, doing yoga. I'm good. Like, we over here. But rarely do I see that on the African continent, in the African diaspora, unless it's the Caribbean. So shout out to the Caribbean for holding it down on that. But travel is the way. What I tell people all the time is you have to make it look sexy. And travel, and I think the Caribbean and those of us from West Africa, we can learn from the Caribbean for making it look sexy. You can't just come out here the way my father's generation, and peace be with them, and shout out to you all for doing the hard work, but he thought it was all engineering, agriculture, lawyer, doctor. That's what he wanted me to be. And I think that's a step. But the other step that we have to take is a very simple step. It can be complex on the ground, but when we speak about it, it's simple. It's making where we're from, anywhere in the diaspora, look appealing and attractive to travel to. What that means is we have to move from this stereotype of charity and move towards investment. What it means is we can't focus just on disease, but on the roads for which those antibiotics are traveling on. What good is charity when you can't, or food, when you can't get it from one place to another? In Nigeria, because it's the country I know the most, the amount of hectares that we lose when we are producing solid food from point A to point B is enormous. These are the things that we have to focus on. Roads, travel, and I kid you not, and I know you all know this, the solution to a lot of our problems rely on the economy. And education is inextricably linked to the economy. In Africa, for example, last time I checked, and maybe you can verify me, it was 10% of trade on the continent was done in between countries. Only 10%. And I heard some leaders speaking about the creation of the Afro currency. You can't create that kind of currency with 10% trade. Europe created the euro with 65% of trade in between European countries. What I would love to see more than anything on the continent and in the diaspora is that number of 10% to increase to at least 65%. And the way, I think, or one of the ways, in broad strokes, is to make sure that we are making it attractive to return to the continent, not necessarily to live, but at least to be around. And the reason why I know this is by my studies in history of the Silk Road. I saw a gentleman when I was behind here, he had a rosary tucked in his shirt. And it reminded me of the history of the rosary, for those of you who are Catholic. Along the Silk Road, which Marco Polo is famous for traveling, Marco Polo and a bunch of his merchants would travel along the Silk Road from Europe to Asia. And along that road, he saw that in the Middle East and in the Far East, as they called it in that day, they had these little beaded necklaces that they would hold while they were praying. And while they were praying, they would count how many recitations of their prayer they were making. And he noticed, he said, you know, that's a great idea. And on his way back from trading, him and his crew brought this idea of a beaded necklace. And because they were predominantly Christian, they added Christ to that necklace, and that became the rosary. Cultural exchange follows trade. it follows travel. Those are the predecessors of union. So when we sit here today and speak, I know that we all have a lot of ideas. I think that we all have brilliant ideas. But vision is more than an idea. It's something that's realized, and I think that we have to, as a people, make sure that our focuses are there. So when we're ideating later today and for the rest of the week, I want us to remember that story about the beaded necklace. That cultural exchange would not have been possible without the trade, without the travel. These are the things that I think that our generation and the generations that are older are and can be focused on. I'll leave you with a couple proverbs that I think my father would say, I have to say here. My father used to talk to me about the village a lot. Like those of you from Africa, every time we talk about the village. And those of you from America, or the Caribbean, we talk about the country. It's all the same thing. My dad used to say, he said, when you're looking at a fire in the village, the way you put out the fire is if you have, let's say, 100 people between the fire and the well. The way they get the water to the fire is they line up the 100 people. On one side, they have the man or the woman pulling up the water from the well. And then they pass the pail or the buckets from one by one on that line to the other person on the other side, who then pours out the water on the fire, and the fire will go out. But there are 100 people in between the fire and the water. But if each person doesn't pass this pail between themselves, then the fire will never go out. But in the headlines tomorrow in the newspaper, my son, there will only be 1 or 2 people that will be written about. And then he asked me, he said, who do you think they will write about in tomorrow's newspaper? I said, well, the man or the woman who's throwing the water on the actual house. He said, yes, and who else? I said, well, the person who's bringing up the water from the well. He said, yes, but that leaves 98 people who will not be in the newspaper headlines tomorrow. He said, you know what happens with those 98 people? They start fighting, fussing and fighting, suffering and smiling about who should be on the newspaper headline. So, but that's not the way that our people are ever going to win. We can't be worried about the headlines, about who is honored for speaking, whether that's me or my brothers and sisters on the panel or you all. We have to worry about the fire being put out. It's not about us just talking and us being heralded for being, that ambassador, that rebel, that artist, whoever we are, and putting out the fire. We just have to focus on bringing that water to that house. And so my father made me realize that my entire life would have to be devoted to putting that fire out. And I know that we are all here today to do that. I know that we all have amazing visions. Some of us think that it's through creating limits on travel, which I certainly believe, whether that's visas on the African continent, or that is us pulling together our resources, our financial resources, to making sure every black person or people of African descent in the diaspora has a free trip home. There's no reason why we can't do that. Other nations have done it, and we have more than a nation. We have a continent, and we have a whole diaspora. So our focuses have to be on that bridge. Our focuses have to be on bringing that water to that fire. And I do believe we have a fire blazing, but I believe that we are on and I mean this in a positive way, the downhill slope of that, meaning that we are coming out of it. And I can say that as somebody in the entertainment business, where for the first time we have African artists and American artists and Caribbean artists on the same song, but that song being on the top of the Billboard charts. Before, that used to be called world music. Now, it's the hip, it's the trendy music. So that's a positive sign. So I hope that our presence and my presence here is a presence of hope for the next generation, those of you who have been doing the hard work before us and before me. I hope that we as a people can focus our eyes not just on the prize and wherever our little silo is, but as the prize together in the Caribbean, in the European diaspora, and I mean that for African descendants in Europe and America and on the continent. And I hope that our focus is on travel, on education that actually leads, that is in tandem with our economic needs, not just saying we need to be educated for anything. We have to know where we are. A lot of us on the continent face industrial issues and infrastructural issues. It doesn't really help to have many philosophers in the education system at that point. So directing our efforts and very practical needs is what we need. And the last thing I'll share with you is the aspect that I think is most important, so that we are not approaching this in a very stale and stern manner. As I said earlier, we have to make it look sexy. And we also have to understand that we can think bigger and better. And this is why. My father said, "Have you ever played the game Pac-Man?" I said, yeah, I play. It's before my generation, but yeah, I've seen it. He said, when Pac-Man goes to the right of the screen and the people are chasing him, he's gone. He looks like he's going to get eaten up by these things. But when he goes fast, he ends up on the other side. And when he's on that side, he's in front of them. He has taken a wormhole, some sort of passageway where he was behind and looked like he was going to get caught. But now he's in front. The African people across the diaspora, they can leapfrog into the future because they are so far behind. So whereas you don't have infrastructure, what you can do is then build new structures because you don't have to tear it down. It's easier. Other people, they have to raise entire buildings and cities in order to create new. That's actually more difficult. When you actually have a lack, when there's a big technological leap, you can create structures easily. There's always the issue of capital, and that's the thing that I'm sure we're going to talk about, where we get our capital from and how we do it. But I think the greater point is that we can do it and that we can move faster. It's not just about railways from Uganda and through Kenya, which is a huge start, and thank you all for being part of that. But it's maybe considering Hyperloop and different forward-thinking and progressive ways to build. Maybe it's not just processed food in Africa when the wave out here is organic food and we already have that.
Yes.
Why are we moving towards a standard that is not our own? We already have the things that people want. In fact, not just the over 51% of the natural resources in our palm and in our grasp, but it's our ideas have been right for years. But I hope that we have the faith and that we have the vision, and I know that we will. And so I thank you all so much for allowing me to be here. I pray each and every day and devote my entire life to this. So it's a pleasure and an honor to be in a room with people that share the same passion and same vision. Thank you all so much for having me.
Jidenna, thank you for such inspiring words. I think that's definitely something we all needed to hear and just be re-energized about devoting ourselves to really getting back home, knowing what home is. I can, just speaking as an African American and not really knowing where you're from, and just recently coming back from Ghana and being and getting the opportunity to experience Cape Coast and the slave trade and knowing what that's like, it changed your perspective completely. You understand immediately, I am African, and what can I do to make a change? So I think it's very good to hear that. We're just gonna open up the floor and for the opportunity for people to ask questions. I think, Janine, maybe you had one question you wanted to kick off with, and then we can go to the audience.
Actually, I think his presentation was quite comprehensive, and I think let's let our guests have an opportunity
absolutely.
to engage.
Okay, so we will open up for any questions. I do ask that if you do have questions, please, one, allow me to call on you so that we don't have conflict in the room, but please make sure that you're using the mic because everything is being recorded and we want to make sure that we capture whatever you're asking. You'll see the red light to know that your line is hot, all right? So any questions? Let's start here, Michael.
Good afternoon. I really enjoyed listening to you. I actually spoke in the panel earlier today on trade and investment and the idea of tourism, and that's the one that I really want to underscore and get your thoughts about how we can promote that is critical. I use an analogy that is being promoted in the agricultural sector of farming is cool, to say how can we make Africa cool? Because until that happens, the negative images that we see so often are what get in the way of connection between diasporans, but America in general, and the continent. And in our discussion, we also talked about the role that the NBA is playing, NBA Africa, in promoting a U.S. sport particularly, but using Africans who are now in the league and coming back and forth. And on August 5th, they had the NBA Africa game. So I see a lot of potential, particularly with artists, in that making Africa cool space that you've underlined. And be real keen to get your thoughts about how can we do this over time. I'm a big believer that you've got to almost treat it like a project. And you lay it out, and over the next 5 years, you set some targets. We would like to get 500,000 people from the U.S., or African Americans in particular, or diasporans, to visit these 10 key cities for trade and investment. So we want to go to Senegal, we want to go to Cote d'Ivoire, we want to go to South Africa, we want to go to Kenya, Nigeria, of course. But having people who have the platform that an artist has, that an athlete has, is not something that we've had a lot of in the past, but now we're starting to have that. So a few remarks from you about how we could catalyze that, and also work with Constituency for Africa, because Mel has been building this bridge. You talked about bridges, and I believe in bridge building for a long time. So enjoyed your remarks and look forward to hearing your comments.
Well, thank you. I mean, I think that, first of all, I'm mad I missed that, because that's exactly where I've been putting my focus on. And really, every time I speak about trade, and I speak about tourism. And the great thing about it is we're in a time where, I'm sorry, there's a little ringing. Can y'all hear me? Is that okay? All right. I'm a music producer, so I can hear everything. I want the tone and the equalizer to be right. I think this is a start, but I think that NBA Africa is doing a great job getting in the ear of the players who have been in the league. It's been amazing work. I've been working with NBA Africa this past year. That's where Auntie Janine and I met. One of my managers, Mikhail Moore, who's in the back, who's actually chief of staff for Congresswoman Maxine Waters before me. Before you were my chief of staff, he was at the game on August 5th. I think that's a prime example of what we need to do. I would say, one, we have to be on the one with the tourism boards. I don't know if there's anybody in the audience who's a rep for a tourism board, but when you see rappers or artists go to a certain place, a lot of people are following them and wanting to go to where they went. I did certain things in my life because a rapper did it, because my relationship with my father is on and off, so I needed a male representative. So the artists and rappers that were men, they became my uncles in the industry, and the women became my aunties. I think that providing easy ways for people, especially people of prominence and influencers, to travel across the diaspora, specifically to the continent. And by easy, I mean, for example, Dubai invited me to come to Dubai, and there was all expenses paid, and they provided an itinerary. It was very easy. I stayed well. It was cool. And then they blasted it to every Nigerian in the world and have me in Dubai, and as if we didn't need it. We already we're part of the reason why Dubai is successful, okay? But I never see that in Port-au-Prince. I never see that in Ouagadougou. I never see the closest places in South Africa, in Johannesburg, and mainly Cape Town. But if I saw that with the top 10 artists or top 10 athletes, me as a young boy, I'm going to be like, oh, I'm going to go to Dakar when I'm older. I'm saving up now. I'm not spending money on that. I'm going to save up and go to Dakar. That is not a dream that a young boy in this country or in the diaspora has. In fact, most of them want to go to Paris, or they want to go to Dubai, partially. These are the places that they see. It's actually not that difficult. You set aside a budget that doesn't have to be the most expensive budget in the world. It can actually be a sizable portion of your tourism board's marketing budget. And you bring these influencers to your country. You make sure they have the most amazing time, and they post about it on social media, and all of a sudden, because most humans are sheep, we all want to go to that place. It's not rocket science. And what tourism will do is provide a very consistent stream of people going to that country, but also a stream of income for that country. And then, as a byproduct, it will create jobs, because those people coming will see idea. It's like I always say, going to an African country is like you get an MBA magically, because if you're from another place, you're like, wow, this is great. There's a lot of work to do, and I actually have some ideas immediately. I was talking to Colin Kaepernick about this the other day. I said, how ironic is it that in the quote-unquote dark continent, which does not have the best electrical grid in the world, when you come back from there, you're the most electrified you ever feel. So that, to me, it's actually not that difficult on a level in terms of targeting influencers. Companies are doing it, nations are doing it. We have to do it amongst ourselves, but you also have to create a program for these people so that they're enjoying it to the point where they want to tell everybody about it. And I certainly, that's my role, but I'm only one. So we can definitely talk at length about how to detailed plan, but those are broad strokes, and I think it's very feasible. NBA Africa is a great example, but you have to target people in music, because trap music and Afrobeats music, which is trap music predominantly made in America, Afrobeats predominantly made in Africa, specifically Nigeria and West Africa. These are the domineering genres in the entire world. And I'm for sure, because I've been in a lot of places, when you go in a club, those are the two forms of music you're going to hear if you're in my generation. So if you target those people, that's a lot of power. It's just targeted movement I think we have to do. I hope I answered some of your questions. Yeah.
Yes, Ambassador.
Oh, okay. Yeah, thank you very much. I know when you started, you wanted us to say yes. These members have said yes, and I'm very inspired by what you said, especially the leapfrogging and the infrastructure. That there's no structure to destroy, but we can build.
Yeah.
But I want to hear from you. Do you see yourself as a leader? Because I'm interested in leadership. I'm teaching and I've been a leader. Do you see yourself as a leader in what you do? And what kind of message do you have to the next generation of leadership, especially what you see in the kind of leadership we have in Africa and elsewhere, even here? Thank you.
Thank you. You know, there's a quote that I originally thought was from my father, but he lied to me. But everything sounds better in his voice, so I'll do it in his voice, as if he said it. He said, you know the difference between a leader and a manager? Some of you know this. He said, managers do things right, and leaders do the right thing. I thought it was amazing. Profound. I was like, wow, my dad is amazing. But when I Googled it, I was like, that was not you, Pop. But it's all good because I believed it. In other words, managers follow protocol and leaders follow principles. I'm not going to sit here and self-proclaim myself as a leader, but I know I'm certainly not a manager. I've never just stuck to protocol, and I'm definitely a man of principle more than I am a man of that. So I think when I look around and I look on the African continent and I travel, and by God's blessings, I've been able to go multiple times every quarter with my team. My team is comprised of Caribbean Americans, African Americans, Africans, and Africans from the European continent. So I really have a real diasporic team. But many of those people, it was their first time on the continent. And so, and when they went there, they were so enriched, so enlightened. But the one thing that was apparent is that the leadership across the diaspora right now, from what I've seen, and I don't mean this to offend anybody here, because I think you all are the ones that I've been meaning to meet for a long time, but many of the leaders that I meet, they're actually managers, and they're managing a neo-colonial system, and they're not leading and inspiring in the way that the leaders in the 60s and before did. I'm not saying that Nkrumah and Lumumba and Kenyatta, I'm not saying all these leaders, I'm not sitting here romanticizing them, but I am saying that when they spoke with undying and 1,000% conviction. And I have not heard that when I go around the African continent. I rarely hear that. I rarely hear ideas that are outside of the box of a rigid and stiff way that we think is progress. And this idea that it's a game of inches. I don't like inches. I like yards. I don't like centimeters. I like kilometers. My dad used to speak to me about a physics equation. I wish I had a whiteboard. I write it down for you. But it's the equation for final velocity, final speed. Final velocity equals initial velocity plus acceleration times time. And when you see it written out, those of you who love physics, many of you who don't, the one thing you find out is time. Everybody has 24 hours and 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Initial velocity, your initial speed, when you're comparing yourself to another country, us in Africa where we are and people of African descent around the diaspora, we don't have a very high initial speed right now because of colonialism and slavery. So that leaves one variable, which is A, acceleration. They say that Rome wasn't built in a day. Maybe not, but Dubai was built in 15 to 20 years. Now, the way it was built is arguably the same way America and a lot of places with forced immigration, a labor force that had to endure a tremendous amount of, as Rastas would call, sufferation. So I'm not saying that it is the way. I'm just saying that with acceleration and conviction, they were able to accomplish something. I don't think that we want to do anything like that in terms of our labor force, but I do want us to believe with that 1,000%, 2,000% conviction, because when you believe with that kind of faith, then you can accelerate with that kind of pace. So that's kind of my comments on leadership right now. I don't see a lot of leaders. I see a lot of managers. And I would like to see more leaders that actually have vision beyond that extends further than their nose.
Jidenna, is that right?
Kedu.
Okay, Kete. It's interesting that the connection, Biafra, your dad getting to Boston. I spent quite a time in Boston. It's like my second home in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I'd like to know how you went out from academics to, and your father allowed you to go into music, because that's, from the Igbo culture, that's like a taboo. I mean, okay? But your wisdom is tremendous. What you related from physics to achievement is fantastic. Fela used music in Nigeria to go after leaders and really either embarrass them or expose them, and encouraged the younger ones to understand what the leaders are doing. So music is a great way to communicate, to challenge leadership. I like to see the artists, your type and others from Nigeria and Africa use music to challenge leaders, because part of the problem of not going to visit, like you say, or taking the picture in Africa, is because of conflicts everywhere. There are no opportunities like you find, or peaceful stability like you find in Europe, or say Dubai, for example, that create excitement. So I would like to encourage you and others like you to find a way to get the message out. Suffering and Smiling was an excellent one by Fela, which is still up to date, is what reigned. Cultural and investment is important. I learned yesterday that it's not enough for African continents to trade among themselves because they don't have much of that trade capacity. Like you said, about less than 10%.
Yeah.
But trade with Europeans and Americans and grow the capacity to the level where you can now have trading between the ECOWAS, for example, and East Africa and South Africa, therefore encouraging a railway from Nigeria to Cape Town, from Ghana to Mozambique, which allow people to trade and interact more freely.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, first of all, for your affirmations. And thank you for your wisdom. To answer your first question, how did I move into music? I told a white lie. I said that I would be an engineer when I went to school, and I was. I started in engineering, electrical engineering. Actually, Stanford had a unique program that combined music, science, and engineering. It was called Music, Science, and Technology. And so I started that program. I convinced my dad, don't worry, I'll be an engineer, just like you wanted me to. All right. But I knew at some point, halfway through, that I would leave that program because I just wanted to be an artist. I didn't want to build the microphones. I wanted to use the microphone. But I learned enough to understand how to build this if I want to. And once I made that move, I told him later what my degree would be in, and it wouldn't be in engineering. He was very disappointed. But over the time, as I spoke to him about what I would use music for, he said it did remind him of Fela. But he reminded me two things. He said, one, that if you're going to do music, make sure you approach it like an inventor. Create something new. He said the people before you, Fela, Bob Marley, they invented new genres. You can never approach it like a regular artist and just try to make money and look for fame and women and all these things. He said, make sure you approach like an inventor. And I swore to him before he passed away that I would do that. So that's the only, I think, piece that he had. So that, I think, that's how I convinced him. That's how I moved. I think that's how a lot of Nigerians and Africans in general convince our parents, is we start on the path and then we might veer. And it's actually an important move for us, because if I don't make that move, then there's no mouthpiece, because if I was an electrical engineer, I probably wouldn't be sitting with you guys right now. That's not to say that electrical engineers aren't needed. It's just to say that we are all needed, right? So that's to answer your first question. And your second question was what exactly?
The conflict, we're talking about people traveling to Africa
Got you.
and being able to enjoy the area. When you don't have investment and you have so much conflict, people don't go.
Yeah.
And so it's about leadership and about challenge using your music and all that, like Fela did, and told Obasanjo and the rest of them, and all the Nigerians and Africans that you're suffering but you're smiling, and this is the reason. So understand democracy, understand what your leaders are trying to pass on to you, but challenge them anyway, so you can build a better country.
Well, I think that two things. Fela wasn't honored when he was alive for the most part. He's actually a fairly recent phenomenon for the world, and he's that way because he was so rebellious. My dad didn't like Fela when he was alive. He liked him later. A lot of times they say a prophet never honored in his homeland, nor is the prophet honored in his or her time, usually. So it's interesting now we revere Fela, but most of us would have been like, yo, he's too radical. But he was speaking truth. Second thing, when we talk about stability, to connect it to trade and tourism, we just have to be smart about when we bring people someplace. You don't bring somebody to your country during election season. That's not the time, you know? And I think also knowing that the way we present places, even for tourism, is that, look, we're still recovering from colonialism and slavery. So we have to be aware that not everywhere is going to have the most amazing roads, or we're going to be able to avoid checkpoints where we go somewhere. It's just not realistic. But if you prepare people like I prepared my team, I said, look, most of y'all from the hood in the U.S. know that a lot of black people around the world suffer a lot of the same things that you're dealing with in the hood. But just keep your eyes open for opportunity and not just see devastation if you're going to certain parts of certain countries. But I think that the beginning of what we can do when we're increasing travel and trade is by focusing on the areas that are stable. Because honestly, you see America right now, the stability is an illusion. We're in a debt-ridden country. This is all illusion. Have things progressed? Absolutely. Are we better off now than before? In many ways, yes. But are there certain things and wounds and scars that we're still dealing with in this country? Absolutely. You know, so if I go to certain parts of even New York State or Ohio or Missouri or Virginia or Illinois, where my family on my mother's side is from, where I was stoned with peanuts and soda cans at a football game because I was the only black face that town had ever seen, and they called me nigger and coon and all these words. Is that stability? That's not stability. So everybody has their issues. I think we can be okay and not be embarrassed by our own. We're all works in progress. But we just have to be prideful and very welcoming and hospitable in the way we are. So I think as long as we do that, it'll be fine for people to travel.
Okay, everyone, we're going to move forward with the program. So I would like to take the opportunity to introduce Dr. Molefi Asante, and he'll provide some strategies for the next generation. So Dr. Molefi Asante is a professor of the African-American Studies at Temple University, where he teaches Afrocentric theories and research in African-American institutions and movement. Asante was born in Valdosta, Georgia, and educated in Tennessee, Oklahoma, and California, where he received the MA from Pepperdine University and the PhD from the University of California at Los Angeles. Asante created the first doctoral program in African-American Studies at Temple University in 1987. An award-winning teacher and writer, Asante has lectured on 5 continents and has held research and visiting positions in Nigeria, Zimbabwe, China, and South Africa. He currently holds 2 honorary professors, one at Xinjiang University in Hangzhou, China, and the other professor extraordinarius at the University of South Africa, Sichuan. Molefi Kete Asante is the author or editor of 95 books, among them an Afrocentric manifesto, written in 2007, which won the Ante Diop Award, Erasing Racism, in 2009, cited by texts and academic books, The Afrocentric Idea, which received the Diop Award for Best Book. His most recent published book includes The History of Africa, As I Am Towards Africa, An Intellectual Portrait, The African-American People, A Global History, and Rooming in the Master's House. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Asante.
It is the most ancient greeting in any language. It's an African greeting from the Nile Valley civilizations, Hotep. So you say Hotep back. Hotep. We got it. All right. I am so delighted to be here. I've often wanted to come to the Constituency for Africa and to be in this audience. And Mel Foote has just been sort of a legendary figure for me for many years. And I've just wanted to come and have conversation with you. I've had conversations everywhere in the world, and it's just good to just come and ground with people. And just to hear Jidenna was just really wonderful to just have an opportunity to meet him and to meet all of you. And I want to say to them, I don't know all the protocols of Washington, so you know I subscribe to them. So all the ambassadors and leaders and members of the board, I'm delighted that you are here and that we are here to discuss this topic. Let me start by sort of giving a little prologue. 4 days ago, I came from South Africa, where I gave the keynote talk at Nelson Mandela University for the 40th anniversary of the death of the murder, actually, of Steve Biko. And the reason that I was invited to do this was because of the relationship between Black consciousness and Afrocentricity, of which I'm one of the main proponents. And I was very curious to hear Jidenna say that we don't need philosophy, because I'm a philosopher. And I think that precisely that is the problem with the African continent. It is a problem with the diaspora. It is we have no ideological position. That is a fundamental problem with the whole development that we see. So what we have is sporadic insights. And when I say sporadic insights, I remember when I first met Sheikh Anta Diop in Dakar, and I was so happy to meet him because he was considered in 1960s as one, along with Du Bois, the greatest African intellectual of the 20th century. So when I rushed up to see him in 1980, I said to him, I am just so happy to meet you. I want to be like you. I want to always defend Africa. And he looked at me and he said, young man, Africa needs no defense. What you must do is always to advance the idea of Africa. And it gave me this notion of agency, which is fundamental. And this is where Afrocentricity comes from. It is how can African people find their own center? What is the narrative of Africa? Not the narrative of other people about Africa. What do Africans say? So when I wrote my book, The History of Africa, I precisely wrote a book that African people would be the subjects of, not the objects, not on the margins of Europe. The Portuguese experience in Africa was only minor, so was the British. Africa's history is thousands of years old. These are footnotes. So you've got to write the story of Africa. Africa must assert itself. But Africa cannot assert itself simply because we say, okay, there's an insight here that we ought to do this, we ought to do that, and we ought to do that, because there's nothing coherent about it. And we say, well, where is the coherence? The coherence is, the lack of the coherence is because we have Africa has not expressed an ideological position Take, for example, the European experience and the European project. From the very beginning, Europe had a very clear idea. Europe dominates the world. That's it. Cecil John Rhodes said, I want Britain to rule from Cairo to Cape Town. It's a dream. It's a project. What's the African project? Where is that project? Where is it in the mind of African children, young people? Hundreds of people came out to hear me talk about Biko. But let me tell you something. Biko was, in my judgment, the most significant intellectual in South Africa. Because he understood that the weakness of Africa only existed because the European held the mind of Africans in mental bondage. That was the weakness. He said it. And it was clear. That's why he had to be killed. You know, it's the most fascinating thing. I've been to South Africa now 6 or 7 times. And when you go to Robben Island, and they take you through the prison, and they'll take you to the cell number 5, where Nelson Mandela was. You see his cell right along with all the other prisoners. But there is a house there in Robben Island that was the home of Mangalizo Sobukwe. It's separated, it's isolated. He was guarded 24 hours a day by guards and dogs, and he could not speak to anyone. Why was Sobukwe treated differently than the other prisoners? He wasn't sent out to break stones because he had an intellectual idea. His idea was that South Africa was a black nation. He could not be permitted to associate with other prisoners. Marxists are okay. Capitalists are okay. But we don't want this guy talking about blackness. The same is true with Steve Biko. That was his idea. Because how do you get off the plantation? The mental plantation that Africans are on. You get off by an ideological idea. All societies are ruled by ideas. You gotta have an idea. If you don't have an idea, you won't even know who your enemies are. If you don't have an idea, you won't know how to form a connection between one diaspora and another diaspora. We can't do this. Because you're a Christian, you're a Muslim, you're a Hindu, you're Buddhist. You're this, you're that, you're from Jamaica, you're from Trinidad, you're from Haiti. No. There has to be an intellectual idea. And that is why we have proposed Afrocentricity as an idea that African people can hold on to. It is that in every situation, you assert your own individuality as a subject of human experience. You are not a victim. You are not acted upon. You are an actor. You're an agent. You're not a beggar. We're not beggar people. We do things. We're the mothers and fathers of human civilization. We're the first people to speak the name God. For goodness sake. Why are we acting like children? You see? This is what we teach, and this is what I teach. And one of the things that I also understand is that if we don't understand from an ideological position, then you will have South African people attacking people from Zimbabwe. You will have South African people attacking people from Mozambique. You see? And all over the continent, you have these issues. The gentleman mentioned this question of conflict. Why is this? Because we don't have an ideological position. Ideology trumps everything else. You can be from the smallest ethnic group on the continent, but if you're an Afrocentrist and you believe in passion for the agency of African people, you then become the leader. It's not about your ethnic group or your linguistic group. It's about what do you believe about Africa. You see? That's a key. Now, and so you don't have xenophobia, or what I should say, Afrophobia, because actually the experiences in South Africa were really people, the fear of Africans. Not just the fear of strangers, the fear of Africans. Europeans were okay, but you couldn't be an African and move to South Africa in some neighborhoods because the people would attack you. And why would they attack you? Because they have no ideological position about Africa. They don't have a sense of relationship that we are all Africans. Why is it that many of the things that I do here in the States is that I work with schools in New Jersey and New York where you have Haitians and Jamaicans fighting each other? Why? No ideological position, no understanding of history. Philosophical thinking is essential. If you understood the Haitian Revolution, you wouldn't have a problem with Haitians. If you understood Nani and the Jamaicans, you wouldn't have a problem with Jamaica. But it's when we don't understand. And I think for young people, for those of us who talk to young people and those who are you who are young, here's the deal. The deal is that, and we started this talking about leaders. I mean, many years we would go to the leaders. I mean, when I was younger, we would always say, you know, what's wrong with African leadership? We need to do this, that. But we have to forget African leadership. You really do. I've never seen anywhere in Africa, for example, a leader that was truly Afrocentric. Never. I've been to Africa 90 times. I lived in Africa. I don't see it. I don't even know one university, and I've spoken to many of them. I don't know one university in Africa that's an Afrocentric university, whose curriculum is based on African ideas, whose center is Africa, whose core is Africa. In fact, I don't know a HBCU in this country that's Afrocentric. I'm sorry, Howard. You know, this is a problem. It's an ideological problem, and it's a problem. So when we talk about Dubai, no, they have an idea. And if you have an idea and you believe in an idea and you pursue that idea, you don't need everybody to be engaged in the pursuit. You just need a critical mass and you could bring it into being. We are disoriented, African people. We have disorientation. I'll tell you what the disorientations are, and I'll be finished. We can go on forever on this. First disorientation is, I call it, we have a terminological disorientation. We have disorientation in terms of how we speak of ourselves and how we speak of Africa and how we speak of other Africans and the diaspora. And by the way, the diaspora is a dynamic idea. It's not a static idea. Diasporas is always being made. They're happening over and over. Many times people are creating diasporas, you see. So we have an ancient diaspora in a sense, and then we have people who are coming from Africa last year and making another diaspora. So we have diasporas coming in that sense. But it's a terminological issue. When I say terminological, what I mean is sometimes it's how we use words about Africa itself and how we speak of Africa. And we sometimes fall into the same language that was used by the people who oppressed Africans. So we speak of Black Africa, for example. You hear people say that all the time, Black Africa. What's the meaning of Black Africa? Africa is a black continent. Anybody in Africa who is not black is either an invader or the son or the daughter of an invader. It's a black continent. It's like Europe. You don't say white Europe. You never heard anybody say white Europe. You don't have to say black Africa. The reason people did it is a political idea. And that idea was to separate the northern part of Africa from the other parts of Africa. But black people live in Libya. I've seen them. Black people have always lived in Egypt. I've been to the villages 16 times in Egypt. The black villages. So we have to rethink. This is a terminological issue. This is an issue of terms. It's a disorientation. But it's not a disorientation that we necessarily cause ourselves, but we follow it. It's the same pattern. You see what I'm saying? So we have to get ourselves out of it. And that way, it becomes ideological. We have to debate and discuss these issues. But I don't see at any level in the African continent any real serious discourse. As the young man Jidenna said earlier, I don't see any discourse among this generation of leaders that equal the generation of leaders like Patrice Lumumba or like Nkrumah. These people were trying to sort out the problems of Africa. But no, now you can't find this. I don't find it. In fact, Thabo Mbeki told me not long ago, he said, you know what? Talking like you talk is the way we used to talk in South Africa. I said, I understand, because I've been going to South Africa a long time. And I understand what it was. And I understood how people had the passion for an idea to bring into existence something that was different, but it had to be something that was different from the leadership. That's why we go with the young people. It has to be grassroots. That's why we created Afrocentricity International. We have 30 chapters all over the African world right now, working quietly. We have them in Harare, we have them in Cape Town, we have them in Abidjan, we have them in Paris, we have them in Rio, we have them in Colombia. These are young people who have adhered to one idea, that we need to create the environment for a United States of Africa. I was so shocked, but should have been shocked, how easy it is to get black people in the diaspora and everywhere else to adhere to just that one idea. People in Brazil said, yeah, that's true, that's great. That's the main idea, but then the other idea is this: ancestral reverence. Those are the only two ideas that Afrocentricity International use. We use, and what we have done, we've got chapters. You can go to our website and look at it. dayabukam.com. You see, it's an organization that's international. It's bringing African people from all language groups together. Not since Marcus Garvey have we had that. So last week, I'm able, last Sunday, to be able to talk with people who are in Brazil, in Cote d'Ivoire, people who are in Guadeloupe, people who are in London. We all talk together on Skype because we've got all kinds of people who can translate. That's a That's the different kind of environment. So why do we do this? We say we do this because we are interested in advancing an idea that we know we can't just talk to the president. We tried that. I tried that. I'll tell you one last anecdote, then I'll finish. In 2004 or 2005, there was a meeting in Abuja in Nigeria. And I was invited to go as a part of a delegation from one country. And they asked about 4 or 5 of us who were considered intellectuals or historians to speak about the United States of Africa. And we got up and we spoke, and then the presidents met. And we watched the presidents who were there. There were a delegation that was led by Obasanjo. And the presidents talked and talked, and then when they finished talking, several of them said, I can't go with this. I don't see this idea about the United States of Africa. I can't see it. One of them said, my country is an old country, and we can't do this because we will lose our identity. Only one person stood up at the time, and that was President Wade of Senegal. And he said, if we could bring this into existence, I would gladly be a governor tomorrow. But we need the United States of Africa. But even people that I knew, presidents that I had known, said we can't do it. And they kicked the ball down the road and said, later, maybe in 2017, all those guys are out of office now, right? You can't do it with the leadership. There's no leadership, and there is no leadership. There's no African leader that can speak like this and can bring African people together like we don't have that person. And the most popular, even though people don't like him, the most popular leader among the youth is Mugabe. They did a survey. The most popular, and you know why? Because at least, and I was just there, when I went to South Africa, I went to Zimbabwe. I lived in Zimbabwe before, but I went to Zimbabwe. Headlines in Zimbabwe. Mugabe says South Africa is still colonized. Young black people like that in Africa because they like a person who tells the truth. And Mugabe tells the truth. I know I'm probably, you know what? This is who I am. That's why you never heard of me before. They don't bring me to these kind of meetings because I tell you, no, I'm telling you the truth. This is what African people feel. They are reasserting themselves as cultural leaders of Africa in Zimbabwe. That's why they had at the National Gallery the International Conference of African Cultures, because they're saying, wait a minute, that's why they invited me to come over there and talk about this. Because my idea, which is a strong philosophical idea, is that what we need on the African continent, we need universities, we need schools that will have Afrocentric curricula where we learn about each other. I mean, why is it that on the African continent there is not an African diaspora department in the universities? Tell me, answer that. I mean, I don't know. Why is it that me coming from Georgia and the United States of America, and I go to the best universities in Nigeria, and I cannot find a course in Nigeria for Nigerian students about black people living in America? We don't have an ideological position. If you take an ideological position, you can do it, because then you will have clarity. And so we've got to fight for that. I'm not going to, I'll just mention the other ones. Terminological disorientation, chronological disorientation. That's extremely important because sometimes we get our times mixed up. It's extremely important. I don't have time to explain it, but if you ask me a question, I can talk about it. Then there's also what I call interrogative disorientation. We ask the wrong questions. We don't know what questions to ask, or we don't know what are African questions, because some things are not African questions. Like a guy said to me the other day, this is just quick. A guy said to me, he said, well, are Africans monotheistic or polytheistic? I said, that's not even an African question. Don't ask me a European question. That's not a, you gotta ask me the right question. It's extremely important for you to understand where you're coming from. And then the last one is what I call narrative disorientation. We don't know whether we're in the narrative or outside of the narrative. And we've got to get a handle on this. And once we get a handle on this, I guarantee you, we will be on the right road. Long live Africa.
Dr. Asante, thank you so much for those thought-provoking comments, especially really getting to the point of the ideological conflict of colonialism and even the ideological conflict that we set within ourselves, and really your thoughts on the need to focus on an ideological position and really understanding our own perspective as Africans and finding that Afrocentricity within ourselves. So I do want to just take the opportunity for some questions for Dr. Asante. So I'll take a round of 3. And then we'll let him see, and then we'll see how we're going with times. Try to keep them as succinct as possible, please. So we'll go first with Dr. Herman, and then the gentleman in the gray, and then the lady right in front of him.
Greetings, Molefi. You and I worked many years ago in the Math and Science Subcommittee for the Baltimore Public Schools.
That's right. I remember. Right.
So
we were still trying to bring Afrocentricity into the curriculum.
Yeah. I wanted to make 2 comments. One is the linkage with Steve Biko. I was 16 years old when I met Steve and grew up with the Black consciousness idea at medical school in South Africa.
Yes.
And Steve was first expelled from boarding school.
That's right.
Then from medical school.
That's right.
And then killed.
That's right.
The progression was fairly clear.
That's right.
But Steve's best writing, I Write What I Like,
Yes.
is a statement of true African identity. I mean, deep identity. And the thing that I learned most from him, every Friday evening we'd meet in his room, drink beer and talk Afrocentricity and Black consciousness. We don't have that anymore.
Wow.
We sort of are derivative people now. So I wanted you to sort of comment about how we've become derivative people instead of identity proactive people.
Dr. Herman, thank you so much. That's powerful. You know, I should have talked with you before I left, because I met many of his friends when I was there, Peter Jones also gave an interview while I was there, and some of the other people. Here's the thing, and that's why I made this statement on national TV in South Africa, that Steve Biko was the most original thinker of his era in that day. But he was also, you're very correct, he was supported by his conversation and discourses with his colleagues, such as yourself and other people, because no one really is an individual who without the support of other people. I mean, our idea of Afrocentricity comes because of my engagement with other people. And I think that with Biko, that's the same thing that we have. That with Biko, what you have is his engagement with other people. And when he produces it, it seems like it's an original idea. And it was original in the sense that here's why it was original for him and not derivative. The ANC, the African National Congress, was essentially an organization that followed the Marxist line. So, and this is one of the reasons it got into trouble with the PAC. This is why Mangaliso Sobukwe declared that the PAC was not going to follow that line. that they were going to follow a line that was more nationalistic. However, when Sobukwe was put in prison and then banned, and then you have the emergence of Biko, Biko looks at all of this, looks at both of those organizations, old organizations, and declared that what I would like to see is the African people regain a sense of consciousness, black consciousness, which would be across. It was not just pigmentation for him. He said black consciousness would engage the black people, the colored people, and the Asian people. Because in a sense, they all had the black definition. This was his struggle. This is talking about bringing people together. This was his struggle. He said, but the people who oppress us, those people, unless they were, and there were some, liberal whites who agreed and who worked with the black consciousness movement, but they could not lead the black consciousness movement. When I read this, because I never met Biko, but when I read it, and I'm 4 years his senior, but when I read it in the U.S. and I heard about it, I understood why Donald Woods, whom I did meet when I lived in Zimbabwe, how Donald Woods could be attracted to an idea that was original, that was original with black people who at that time could not get books because certain books were banned, and yet they were able to discuss Frantz Fanon. They were even able to discuss James Cone's theology, black theology. So there were things that were percolating, and that gave him a sense, I think, of the originality rather than being derivative. But they thought that the Marxists were derivative. I mean, so you're going out and you're following Lenin and Marx, you're not really African, are you? You see? But here's a man who says, look, we have our own tradition. We have a long tradition. Not only a long tradition from Xhosa people, we have a long tradition from Zulu people. The Zulu Personal Declaration, which appears in one of my books, African Intellectual Heritage, is a declaration that was given to me at the time by Jordan Ngubane, which is a lengthy treatise, philosophical treatise on what a person is. There's a long tradition of thinking and discussion, discourse. You see, I'm sorry, too long.
What we're going to do, let's hold the question. We're going to bring up our next panel. So to my immediate left, we have Ms. Raina Turner, and then beyond her, Ms. Jackie Jidenna. So I'll just take a brief moment to provide their bio, and then I'll allow them to speak. Ms. Raina Turner's passion for creating healthy, sustainable communities by alleviating economic disparities shifted her career focus from merely advertising the issues to engaging in grassroots education and solution generations. Her unique professional background is a culmination of marketing, digital and traditional, partnership development, and urban education. In these various roles, she has personally expanded her accountability to include strategic consulting and educational program evaluation and management. And then Ms. Jackie Jidenna. Jackie joins the YALI Mandela Washington Fellowship team as the Corporate and Private Partnership Manager. In this role, she is responsible for leading and supporting the global team in partner outreach and retention. As a human rights lawyer and marketing professional, Jackie is an advocate for social change, gender, and youth development. She is an incoming to IREX with a wealth of experience in resource mobilization and partner development. So Raina, I'll turn it over to you.
Good afternoon. I'm more of a conversationalist, but I will just share a little bit about what it is that I have been working on and what I've been doing and why this is so important. I do want to give thanks to Melvin Foote and to everybody else here with the Constituency for Africa for allowing me to be here and to speak. Give thanks. I am here. I know a lot of people have proverbs, but my favorite one comes from my father. It's around us standing in the shades of trees that we did not plant. I'm not here, and I'm not speaking just for myself. I am speaking on behalf of everybody who has helped to develop my thought process, my ideology, and my concepts. The work that I've been doing has been around sustainable community development. It's a little bit of a mouthful, but sustainability is not a new concept, as we hear. It's more around self-sufficiency. And when we look at the leadership, or perhaps lack thereof, as we've been hearing, on the continent, and even here within the United States, we see that there's a lot of dependency that's been created. And so through the sustainable community development components that Sustainable Community Solutions Network, which I am the executive director of, we have been developing a pipeline, not just for those that actually live here across the diaspora, but for those that actually live on the continent. And so I think most recently, last week, actually I got back from Ethiopia and have been looking at creating micro enterprises around bamboo. When we look at what we already have and the resources that are there, and we look at the traditional wisdom of the people that are there that's constantly being disregarded for westernized ideology and people discarding the things that their parents have brought to them. I think there's a proverb around, do not throw out your mother's food. Something in this sense around what your mother knows has been best for you, which has worked for you for years and years and years. Do not throw it out. There's nutrition that's there. There's wisdom that is there. And so through reclamation and Sankofa and going back and fetching the wisdom, not only just around what people think sustainability is, it's not just limited to an ecological standpoint. We're talking about how can you be self-sufficient with your health. You didn't always have to go to a hospital. What did you do? You would go into the bush with the mud. You would pull the herbs. If you're from the Caribbean, you do the bush baths. We're looking at reclaiming all of that wisdom for your education, for your children to not be educated by somebody else. We're looking at how are we utilizing the resources that grow in our own backyards to actually develop. We're building our own homes utilizing ancient wisdom. You can utilize bamboo. You can utilize certain woods. You can utilize different herbs and things like that. And so what started off as an idea that I was extremely passionate about and started talking to other elders and kind of sharing and sitting at their feet and then taking what little money that I actually had and funding my own trips going back and forth to the continent and sitting at the feet of elders for at least a month, I decided to quit my job. I was like, this is not working. I don't like this. Working for a nonprofit, I can do business acceleration. I can talk to you about how do you develop a business. I can get you the access to capital. I can get you the funding, and I can tell you how to do it and build a wonderful enterprise. But I'm not helping my own people. So what I did was I took a leap, and I worked with some elders who gave me their support and their contacts. And they told me, go and do what it is that you feel like you should be doing. And with that, I decided to do an online summit. I thought, okay, maybe I'll get 100 people. This is my second year doing the summit. I have 2,000 people who have joined a network that are interested in developing sustainably across the diaspora, not just limited to one country. They put down the flags. They stopped waving their flags, and they said, this is what we want to do. We are tired. It is time. 2,000 people. We have put out some bids for contracts. I've connected certain people to other organizations, nonprofits, NGOs on the ground so that they can actually develop infrastructure for water. I never thought that would be possible. And when I say I, it's not just me. It's a team. But we care about not just today, 7 generations ahead. Where are my children going to live? We can develop, yes, we have architects, we have engineers, a dynamic team, by the way, but it is limited to those, or not necessarily limited, it is exclusive to those of African descent. So that network of 2,000 people are those of African descent who are using their talents, their wisdom, their time, and their energy, and they say, I want to help develop across the diaspora. Where can I go? Can you connect me with this person? I want to do this, I want to do that. I'm really great with watershed. I'm really great with developing or dealing with architecture or dealing with health and infrastructure. Can you connect me to the right people? And that's what this network has actually been about. I'm proud, I'm honored to be here. It's been a lot of hard work, and it was a lot of faith to step out and say, you know what, I'm going to cut the ties to what was actually my bread and butter. But it's done, and it's moving. So thank you. I think one of the biggest pieces for why that came about, and my frustration was around some of the challenges that everybody has talked about already today. There's a lack of passing the baton. There's a lack of, well, if you're already holding the seat, can you just give me a little seat? Just let me sit back here and sit at your feet. It was very difficult. It was very difficult. It was not just humbling. I mean, I had to bow and to crawl, but I really wanted to get that information. And I give thanks for people like Mel, and I give thanks for other elders who did not make it so difficult, because they said, somebody else did it for me, I would do it for you. Others, not so much. And I feel like that's a challenge. It's not just here, but across the diaspora. You find these leaders that sit in these positions that are not even talking to the next generation. The country should be upset. The people should be upset. Who are you grooming to pass it forward? And so with lack of leadership, I decided to kind of build an institution without walls and to kind of go around it. So we host trainings in person and digitally. The network is all online completely. There is a Black Sustainability Summit that happens every single year. We are now moving. We'll be doing it in Atlanta, which is my hometown. I'm a Georgia girl, Georgia Peach. We'll be doing it in person this coming year, this coming summer. And I've already secured a Sustainability Institute that's being developed in partnership with one of my closest friends and nonprofits, Habesha. If anybody's from Ethiopia, you know Habesha people, but it's actually an acronym for helping Africans by establishing homes or establishing schools at home and abroad. And so what we do is we are looking at pulling each of the components of sustainability, creating an institution without walls, and we're starting in Ghana. The development should be finished in 2020. We're actually asking people not just to visit. Don't just come to Africa. You can come and see, make an assessment, but bring your knowledge and skills. And if you don't have them, we'll train you. Let's look and see what the people actually need. Let's look and see what you actually have. And we can identify the people that already have those skills and assets and knowledge to sit there and train you. I had 32 people my first year during the summit that dedicated their time, their wisdom, their knowledge for free. They did not charge me a thing. We recorded all the videos and distributed them for free. The next year I had 45. This year I'm really hopeful, and hopefully some of you may be interested in also participating. They've been doing it for free because we need to make sure that our people are educated, they have the skill set that they need, and that we're creating these enterprises that can continue to fund our own self-sufficiency. That's where I am. That's what I'm looking to do, and that's what the network is doing right now. Thank you so much.
Raina, thank you so much. I think you raised a very, very important point, and I'm happy that we have it on record about passing the baton. I think it's just imperative of the current generation to really step up and mentor us. We want that. We're begging, we're pleading for, we want to know their wisdom and the ways so that as we move forward as the next generation of leaders, we are well equipped to take things forward in the strongest way possible. I also appreciate you holding with the central theme of traveling, getting back home, knowing what home means, and then also I think it's something powerful in believing yourself. I always look in the mirror and I always tell myself every day, bet on black. And I'm betting on my black. All right. That every day that whatever it is that I want to do, I have everything within me to be able to do it. And I think it's possible. I think it's very important that we as next generation hear that. You can step out on faith and it's going to happen because you don't have any other choice. It has to happen. So I appreciate you for that. Thank you. So we're going to turn over next to Jackie. Jackie, thank you so much for joining the panel.
Thank you to Mal and to CFA for this opportunity. I'm just going to share a bit of my story and then, we'll take it from there. So 11 years ago, I returned to my country of birth. I was excited, I was positive, and I was motivated to transform the nation and apply all the things that I had learned when I was studying abroad. I was launching my legal career as a public prosecutor at the Attorney General's office. I was going to be the change that I wanted to see. Unlike most of my high school friends, I had returned to rebuild the nation. I'd left Zimbabwe about 6 years before that, at a time when things had started to fall apart. Zimbabwe had gone from being the breadbasket of Africa to being the basket case. It was a nation that had once exported wheat, tobacco, corn to the rest of the continent, and was now faced with food shortages as a result of severe drought, and of course, much needed land redistribution. I knew when I started that the task ahead of me was not going to be easy, but I would have rather enjoyed that than constantly having to defend my country and my leaders and deal with the frustration that I felt each time I heard another ignorant remark about Africa. I was proud to be home. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd done my homework before I ventured into this bold mission. But I tell you, nothing could have prepared me as a young person for the chaos, the corruption, the dishonesty that I witnessed in the courts of Zimbabwe. The legal system was a mess. I was witnessing the death of the rule of law right before my eyes. And as an officer of the court, I was faced every single day, without fail, with a compromising situation in the office. To cut a long story short, it only took me a couple of years before I realized that I would need more than just my two hands to rebuild the justice system, let alone confidence in the nation. I was young and ambitious, but number one, I had no experience. Number two, I didn't have a good mentor. And number three, I didn't have my peers beside me to support me in my efforts. I quickly realized, there's a need for change, and we're all eager for change. But our efforts, number one, needed to be coordinated. I needed to be part of a strong network. This was much bigger than just me, and it was much bigger than just my Zimbabwe. We needed an army of young, enthusiastic Africans to sweep across the continent. It had to be a movement. And that was the launch of my career in movement into youth development. Fast forward to today, I'm working on the Young African Leadership Initiative. It's a US government program that aims to build the skills of young African leaders to improve accountability and transparency in government, to help them start their own businesses, and to serve within their communities. And over the years, I have worked on several similar transformative programs, and I'm always amazed at how quickly things are changing on the continent. Just when I think it can't get any better, young people impress me more and more. Africa is now the youngest continent on the planet, with over 200 million people aged between 15 and 24. By 2040, Africa will have 1.4 billion people of working age. Africa's narrative is changing, from being the dark continent to being the continent on the rise. Africa is richer, she's healthier, she's safer, she's better educated, more peaceful, and more democratic than we have ever seen. And having enjoyed the privilege of working with you over the last decade, I'm more hopeful than ever that we're moving in the right direction. We're gaining momentum, and there is a generation on the rise that is developing the Africa that we have all dreamt of. I've had the honor of working with the African Leadership Group as well, which started the African Leadership Academy, which you may have heard of. And it's a school down in Johannesburg, which is redefining the future of education in Africa with its groundbreaking programs. I'm talking about 16 and 17-year-olds who have started businesses or who are in creative industries, who not only pay for their fees with their projects, but are generating enough profits to send 400 other children within their rural communities to school. The examples are many. Amongst the YALI leaders, so many of them. All of this, of course, is not without its challenges, which is what we're here to talk about. And the challenges and the opportunities that our next generations are facing. I'm not going to go into too much detail about the long list of challenges, because the media, of course, highlights much of these on a day-to-day basis. I'll just mention a few that, in my opinion, I feel the next generation needs to pay special attention to. The first is the challenge of leadership. Africa will rise and fall because of the quality of our leaders. And I love how my old boss, Fred Swaneker, explained it. He said, one good leader in Africa can make a huge difference. And we don't need to look very far. Nelson Mandela is an example. Isn't it amazing how just one person can make such a huge impact? And he explained why. He said, this is because we don't have strong institutions in Africa. And thus, there are no checks and balances to control leaders. Presidents can wake up one morning and change the constitution and decide, yeah, I think I'm going to rule this nation forever. Or let me just borrow money from the government coffers and build my mansion. Or, you know, I don't know, I feel like doing this today, so I'm going to do it. Let's rename the airport. It doesn't work in, you know, countries like the USA, where you have strong institutions. You know, the president can hardly use 140 characters without the media barking at him. He can't change the law without Congress approving. And the courts can check him if he makes a move that contradicts the values of the Constitution. That's the power of a strong institution. They create the checks and balances. They help to guide the leaders. And you can't stay in power forever. The system forces you to keep it moving. Let's go back to African leadership. 2015, median age of African population, 19 years old. In comparison to 78.5 years, the average age of 10 of the oldest African leaders. That's a huge gap. Quite clearly, a big disconnect between the leaders and the people that they're leading. I'm a firm believer, of course, that in every challenge lies the opportunity. So what can be done? The next generation has an opportunity to build strong institutions. And this must become a priority for all Africans and for all of us in the diaspora. This means building the schools, the tertiary institutions, setting up the right faculties in them, like you said, fixing the infrastructure, reshaping the government, training new leaders, and investing on the continent. To continue programs like the Young African Leadership Initiative, the Mandela Washington Fellowship, and schools like African Leadership Academy. The leaders are there. They're there in Africa. Last year, we had over 65,000 applications for the fellowship. 65,000. Talent is out there. We haven't even begun to tap into the potential. And we as the diaspora, we're not here to empower Africans, but rather to invest and to enhance their skills and their efforts. YALI has regional leadership centers that are housed in institutions all over Africa. And we're rubbing shoulders with these impressive young people every day. We're identifying youth and creating opportunities where partners, local businesses, and individuals can invest in the work that they're already doing and enhance their efforts. Those in the diaspora can invest in that as well, in such programs, partner with them, sponsor scholarships for young leaders to go through these courses, seed capital for their businesses, absorb some of these resources into your organizations, mentorship, mentor some of these young leaders. We are always looking for mentors. We're looking for them all the time. So many young people in Africa who can benefit hugely from experiences of those who are in the diaspora. And I want to very quickly speak about the challenge of poverty, a huge problem that the next generation leaders are faced with. The statistics for poverty around the world have fallen over the years, but not in Africa. Over 40% of the people in sub-Saharan Africa live in absolute poverty. 75% of the world's poorest countries can be found right on our beautiful continent. It breaks my heart. Although we are seeing rapid development in Africa, poverty is rife, and in this poverty lies an opportunity for the next generation, and that opportunity is that to create prosperity. With a growing population, by 2050, Africa will have the largest workforce in the world. And this translates to a need of over 1 billion jobs. 1 billion. Our economies need to grow, and they need to grow quickly. It's happening, but not nearly fast enough. Of the 1,000 fellows that we had in 2017, close to 50% of those young leaders have started their own businesses and are running their own businesses. It's impressive, yes. But these businesses need investors to help them to grow to their fullest potential. These young entrepreneurs need experts and mentors and guidance to help these businesses to grow so that they can employ more people. This may mean, growing the business beyond the borders of their home countries. But again, we've spoken about this. It's so difficult. African governments have made it so difficult for Africans to trade with one another. And these policies, they need to change. The laws need to be reformed. And these changes need to happen quickly. And we need to play our part to facilitate that. Like I said, there's so many amazing stories of the young leaders that I work with and what they're doing. And I think for years we've been talking about how we can help them. We have proposals, policies, concept notes, white papers, you name it, it's there. And nothing that I've said to you today is new to any of you. The key for us now is to just do it. We need to act and to follow through on what we've proposed. We really need to hold one another accountable for the ideas that we've put forward, and for action and for progress. We need to get up from our comfortable spaces, and we need to visit Africa. We need to go there, and we need to do it regularly so that we're in touch with what is really happening around there. I'm deeply humbled every single time I get to visit some of our young leaders on the continent, and every single time I get to go home to Zimbabwe. I realize every time that they're not waiting for us. No, they're not waiting for us to come with our solutions or with our resources or our action points. No, Africans are dynamic. They're bending, breaking, and reshaping their communities every single day. They're self-correcting. They're shaping their economies. Our nations are brimming with hope and with possibility. And they're filled with experts who know the terrain a lot better than a lot of us who are here, and who are thriving in those environments that we are eager to contribute to. The ship, it'll keep sailing, with or without us. And for many, the home that you left behind, or the Africa that you visited even a few months ago, is not the one that you'll find when you return. And those of us in the diaspora, we need to take action, yes, and we need to play our part, but with humility, without forgetting that the greatest experts are there on the ground, and they're the ones that we need to tap into to make sure that our efforts are effective. Thank you.
Jackie, thank you for your comments and really providing a roadmap of the challenges that we as Next Generation can look forward to addressing, and also the reminder that we continue to hold ourselves accountable for the actions both here as well as on the continent. So at this time, I'm going to open up the floor for a couple of questions for any of our panelists.
Quick comment and then my question, but I'll lead with my question so that we have it in our head. We spoke a lot about leadership today and the passing of the baton. And I'm just interested to know what are some tangible ways that we see that passing of the baton or a way for that to occur. In other words, how do we ensure that we institutionalize this African-facing and positive outlook that I think so many of us who travel have? That's my question, and just my quick comment just to clarify with Dr. Molefi about philosophy. The foundation of any leader is the ideology of that leader, which is the philosophy of that leader. When I spoke, I hope I didn't misspeak to veer us the wrong way. I spoke in terms of, in a presidential perspective, in thinking about the economy of a nation, or the economy of a mass group of people. We have to think, what does the nation or what does the people need, so that we are training and educating based off what the actual needs of the people are. What I did not mean to imply is that we don't need philosophy or philosophers, but that when we see masses of a group, for example, the state that I'm from in Nigeria, last time I was there, thank God it's improved, but my family lives in 75% in poverty in our state alone. So when the governor goes to think about the education system there, he has to figure out what is actually needed and what skills do they have. And so my suggestion was more based on a mass group. But, so I don't think it's necessarily engineers or artists or philosophers, and any one group. I think actually we need it all. And I think but the foundation of leaders actually is philosophy. So thank you for actually being from the generation that spoke to us, I think we can all agree, and the younger generations for creating the ideology and philosophy that we are able to use today. But to veer us back to the question is, how do we create that institution so that professors like Dr. Molefi Asante, his knowledge and his wisdom, and other people who are sitting in this room, it can be easy and accessible and attractive to the younger folk?
Thank you for the question. So we'll take the next question, please, in the black. Come to the mic.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for the excellent comments. My name is Lola Adeliosho. I'm with Diaspora Rise Up. We created an initiative just to what you were speaking about. One is we have tons of young people here who are interested in going back and supporting organizations, not just starting businesses, but we have a lot of local community organizations that are doing excellent work. But when we surveyed them, the top two questions, challenges they face: funding and capacity. And when they say capacity, it's more human capacity. And so we're actually, I would love to talk to you afterwards, creating this idea of how do we get younger people who have the skills, the talent, the brilliance, and everything else that they want to serve. Changing the narrative about how we give, what giving means to us as a community, that it's not just about money, it's about time, talent, and opportunity. And so, how do we talk about beyond just trade and, tourism and all these other wonderful things? The fact is we have a huge portion of our community that are living in abject poverty. And those people are the people that also need the hand and the support and the community behind them, because who knows where the next cure for cancer is going to come from. They may be living in an internally displacement camp right now. So how do we as a community of younger people engage ourselves so that we move really into action and not just relying on the things that didn't work or worked in the past, but also saying that, I may not be able to write a check for $100,000 yet. I say yet. But I can still do something in making sure another child, another organization that is from, regardless of what country you're from, is able to do what they need to in their local community. So I would really love, to hear about how you're sort of bridging that gap, but also any recommendations for organizations that are diaspora that want to support local organizations on the continent.
Thank you for your question. So we're going to take the last question from the gentleman in the gray.
My name is Sal Tawhidi. Actually, the last question was actually a question I was going to ask, and the prior question from the gentleman also. So I want to make a comment on Dr. Molefi's presentation about the Afrocentric issue. I think it's an important one that we need to address, but in my experiences, in my travels, and talking with Africans and African-Americans, it's very true and it's very disheartening to find out when you ask them about the Afrocentric dimension that they're unaware of books like Ivan Van Serti's book, they're unaware about Cheikh Anta Diop's book, and they just seem, I'm just curious to know, where was the disjoint, how did it come about from 1980 all the way up to 1990, there was barrage of information that was coming out on Africa. And all of a sudden, these leaders, the leaders that you talked about not having an Afrocentric focus, it just dissipated. It just mystifies me. And then this one thing I want to say, Dr. Molefi, I'm glad to know that you presented, you gave an analysis of the problem, but you also gave a solution. You're actually involved with the grassroots, creating schools and institutions. So I'd be interested to know how I could be involved in helping you with that. Yeah.
Thank you for your comments and the ending question. So we'll take the question. So just to give you a brief summary of the questions, and you feel free to take whichever one you like. So our first question was about leadership and really passing of the baton. And what are some tangible ways that we can move forward in passing the baton to the next generation? The second question was in regards to the mobilizing young people that want to serve but may not have the means. And so really, how can we change the narrative on giving for those of us who may not have the opportunity to give the hundreds of thousands or large grants, but how can we change the narratives within our communities so that we are starting to invest in the next generation in whatever way that we can?
So I'm going to answer the first question. What can we do to pass on the baton? As Americans would say, I say baton. So my dad also had those proverbs, and he always used to say to us that success without success is failure. Without a successor is failure. And I think the first thing that we can all do in terms of passing on the baton is to make sure that you're responsible to have somebody who's a successor for you. Who are you teaching? You know, like she said, you may not be able to start big, but you have something to give. Who are you teaching? Who have you taken responsibility for? That's the first thing that I challenge you to do. Then the second thing is our leaders need to create a seat at the table for young people. This is within governments, within policy making, within law reform. Create a table, a seat at the table for young people. There's got to be a voice of a young person. I say this all the time. I go into the meetings, the first thing I do is scan the room and I say, is there a young person in there? And if there's not, the first question I ask, where are the youth? Where is the voice of the youth? There's got to be the voice of the youth. You've got to have a young seat at the table, and you've got to have them all the time. You look at the African Union with Agenda 2063. They're the head of state summit, and they said to us, we don't have the resources, but can you fund 4 young African leaders who can come in from every corner of the earth, and we want them to come and speak and address the heads of the state. That's what you do. You find the people who can sponsor people to come, and you do it to make sure that we have young people who are speaking. Another thing we can do, create opportunities within your business, within your industry. What can you do? You know, thank you for YALI. Thank you. And I'm grateful to the US government for the investment that they've made, because the funds are there. What are we looking for? We're looking for people, partners on the ground. We're looking for businesses all the time. We're saying, can you create an opportunity for someone, a resource to come into your company 6 months? You're not paying them. We'll pay them. We'll give them a stipend. Give them an opportunity. Teach them what you know. Let them teach you what they know. Open up your doors and let these young people come in. The opportunities are there. And YALI is not the only one doing it. I mean, we have regional leadership centers. We have the African Leadership Academy. They're there. Young people are there. The resources are there. So internship opportunities, mentorship, webinars. There's no reason why you can't do a webinar and young Africans just listen to you. They would love to listen to you. They would love it. They would grasp at the chance just to hear the wisdom you shared here. I was like, oh my God, I was recording. I said, ooh, I need to find a way to post this on YouTube or something. They need to hear this. Webinars, people want to hear from leaders. They want the young people, they want to hear from leaders. They want to sit at the feet of the leaders. You know, when I was young, we used to have sessions with the president. Oh, we would go to the State House, and we would sit at Mugabe's feet, and he would talk to us. I'm not dynamic like this just by coincidence. I was raised. And then finally, you're a leader. You're grown. You have experience. Make yourself accessible. Make yourself accessible. It's as simple as that. You know, it's like leaders are the people you can't reach at the top. They're at the top table. The top table is inaccessible. No, make yourself accessible. Whatever you have to do, whether it's through social media, maybe you take some time out. Maybe you don't have the time to have sessions where you're visiting everybody in Africa. But maybe you have a question and answer session, just some time on social media, Twitter, where young people can ask you questions. You're teaching them. They're listening to you. They're giving you their ideas. You're accessible. That's it.
Okay then. The only thing that I would add to that around the accessibility is around accountability. It may not be in their character to want to even do that. But how are you going to hold these people accountable? And if you're looking at how are you going to institutionalize it, I love the fact that there was something that's been in place, and there are different organizations and opportunities for young people to actually sit for 6 months or for 3 months and to sit at their feet. But utilizing digital media, figuring out a way for them to actually sit there and learn from them, it has to be institutionalized. It has to be some type of way that it's actually written in, because unless it's dealing with their character and them knowing that they need to pass it forward, maybe we pull on the ego and ask them, maybe it's for your legacy. Maybe that's a component for you to have a strong legacy, if that's the only thing that's going to move you forward, because clearly the character development has been quite poor. And so that would be my only piece around accountability that's been added to that so that it can actually be institutionalized. I think there was another question from the sister in the back. Around, you would diaspora rise up? Very nice. Around what giving means. I think when we talk about poverty and we talk about, those being poor, I think we have to reconceptualize what that actually means. And education, I know people scream, education, education, education. I think the piece around that has been reconceptualizing what success looks like and what your talents look like, right? I didn't grow up with much, but my father had been a driving force. I got The Destruction of a Black Civilization by the 6th grade, and I was reading Walter Rodney, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, before I got into the 9th grade. So it's been instilled in me to always question my source and to question who's giving it to me and to also question what value looks like. And when you're looking at people that are saying, oh, I'm impoverished or I need a handout, what type of skill sets do you have? Because as we've already stated, the term expert, whoever is coming up with the terminology, you get stuck in it. It's not that you have to be an expert because you've gone to school or because you've sat here in all these years. And I'm definitely not putting down those who have put in their due and have gone and have learned and have given us this wisdom. But when we talk about the youth and the reason why I've gotten so many young people and elders as well who may not be as technologically savvy, but their heart is there to say, I want to participate, I want to give back. I don't have the money, but I got the time. I have the skill set, or I can connect you to the right person. And opening up those resources and those connections is more valuable than any donation can actually be. And so when we're looking at helping them to think about their value, reframing it, and you don't have to have the dollars. It might not be something that looks sexy right now, but I can tell you from my travels, when I ended up in the Congo and in South Africa and then in Ghana so many different times, and I'm just getting back from Ethiopia, I wasn't surprised the second or the third or the fourth time, but I was surprised my first time when I said, wow, you are really looking to the West as your holy grail. You have the wisdom, looking at it, and they were, no, we don't have it. Y'all got it. I'm like, no, you have it. They're like, nah, you got it. I'm like, okay, all right. So I got it. Okay, let me tell you what to do. And so now we're going, and they're telling me, oh, bamboo is the poor man's this. I'm like, bamboo is sexy. They're like, bamboo is sexy. We want bamboo. Like, yeah, okay, well, we want to develop with the earth. Yeah, we want to do that too. What is this? And so utilizing and recognizing what your strengths are, and then also pulling on the knowledge and wisdom that they already have and allowing them to see the value. And that has been the piece that's been very successful for me. That's all I can share with you at this time, and we'll chop it up when we finish. Sorry.
I'm sorry, I'm not on the panel.
Okay.
So I shouldn't be answering this question, but I got a microphone, so. Thank you for all your questions, by the way, and with Diaspora Rising, is that? Rise Up. Thank you so much, and especially as a Nigerian to be part of that as well. That's important. Just know that when I speak about tourism and travel, it's not as the end all, it's the means. And the reason why I say it instead of focusing on poverty and aid is because, again, back to my dad, he spoke about, he used to take a lot of pills before he passed away, right? So I'd have to feed him pills, and he hated taking the pills. So he always asked me to buy about 2 cans of applesauce, right? And he would make me load up the spoon with applesauce and then put 1 little pill in it. He said, you know why I'm doing this? So I can take the taste of the pill, so I don't know I'm having the pill. If I'm just eating applesauce. And the reason I bring that is because I actually think that tourism and travel and trade, really mainly tourism and travel, is the applesauce. That's the only reason why. And I've taken my entire life to believe that. I'm not that old. But I say that because I spent years focusing on the pill. And you know how it is when we get in the room. Everybody gets scared. Like, oh, he's a radical. He's a rebel. It's so funny when you talk about just uplifting your own people and doing what Chinese people have done, Jewish people have done, people in the Middle East and Europe have done for years. When we speak about it, all of a sudden we're revolutionaries. There's nothing revolutionary about helping your own. So that's why I say the applesauce is important to have, or else we'll get in these conversations that feel like we're preaching to the choir, and we're not getting the youth in the room because they want to post on Instagram, and I know it. I'm one of them. So that's one thing. The second thing, just building off what you're saying, it's one thing we haven't addressed is how when you have these, forgive me, but these stubborn old men in seats of power, how do we get rid of them, right? Fast. Well, one thing, I forgot who told me this, but it was a brilliant idea. There was a woman who said to me one day, she said, do you realize that these men, they're in their 70s, they're not very technologically savvy? He said, but the kids who are 17 are. She said, if we can find a way to create a voting system that is completely digital and protected by the African Union, and by protected I mean like actually defended. So imagine a voting agency that goes to the village with a tablet, and then another tablet that is the Wi-Fi hotspot for the other tablet, and then you allow the people there to actually vote, and that they're protected by not just people in their nation, but people of what I would hope the African Union would do. And then they have that person voting in their privacy and in their security, and they're able to vote for a leader, and that person could be 19 years old voting for the new leadership. These are the kind of ideas we have to have, but the only way those kind of occurrences are going to occur is with protection. Well, what I don't see enough, and what I would like and challenge those of you who are members of the African Union here and members of anybody who's fighting for this particular cause, is the kind of protection that I see elsewhere. Imagine if Jewish people were getting shot in Williamsburg or Crown Heights, New York. Do you think Israel would stand by? But where are the African leaders on the continent when we are getting shot by police in this country? Where is somebody in Nigeria, in Ghana, across from Kenya to Congo? Where are those people when brothers and sisters here are getting hurt? This is the kind of thinking we need. It's centralization. We don't need more NGOs and nonprofits. I swear we don't. We need a centralization of the ones that already exist. The fact that you all do the same work, which is actually work that I've done. I didn't speak about it, but this is the same work that I'm involved in. Then we all need to be one, because otherwise we're competing for grants. And to compete for that grant, where one person loses, the other person, it's not a win, actually. We have to win, win, win. So I think the idea of to combat a decentralized people, you have to centralize.
I wanted to add to that to her question. I'm in fundraising, so I know one of the things that you spoke about was the challenges of funding, right? And what can we do even though we don't have much? And you know, I want to encourage you to think outside the box, especially because you're young people and you're creative. You know, you may have very little, but with like crowdsourcing, I love what he spoke about the Vietnamese community. They were buying houses together. And like I told you, I was determined when I returned to Zimbabwe to rebuild this nation. I was like, oh, I don't need my peers. Let them stay where they're staying. And I realized when I got them, it takes more than me. It's got to be a coordinated effort. So the little that you have, bring it together. Start small, but you won't remain small, especially with funding. Find one person that we as this community are going to invest into this one business on the continent. You work with that person, you market it. Let me tell you, it gives birth to itself. That's what money does. Money, it gives birth to itself. I'm in the business of looking for money. I've seen it work.
Yeah, I want to just take a quick, make a quick comment. I'm fascinated by this conversation, by the way. I think it's absolutely on point. My question, you know, I've been working on Next Generation for a long time. I've actually been working hard to actually realize the next generation leadership. I have tried. I've done everything I could to bring the next generation forward. And I don't think everybody around Washington who works on it, they know I've been trying. The YALI, Obama asked me, he said, okay, what should I do? You know, I'm fighting 2 wars, the banks have collapsed, the housing market collapsed. You know, I'm following George W. Bush, who was the greatest president we've ever had on Africa, $15 billion for PEPFAR, $5 billion Millennium Challenge account. Welcome to the White House, Mr. Black Man. And so he said, I need to buy some time. What do you think? So I said, look, don't focus on your guy, Mugabe. Don't focus on Biya. Don't focus on Bashir. Don't focus on God. Focus on the young ones coming up, this next generation. That quote resonated with Obama because he was already thinking about this empowerment. So I'm excited about it. My issue is, you know, we know for a fact the last 100 years, we've been kept, whether it was colonialism, whether it was slavery, divide and conquer was the #1 strategy. Divide you from you, divide the light skin from the dark skin, the young from the old, the women from the men, divide them and conquer, and that continues. So I'm seeing this young generation coming up, and I'm asking myself, are they unified? Are the African immigrants talking to the Caribbean? Are the African Americans part of the equation? Are the left hand talking? With all the digital communications apparatus, you can talk to anybody anywhere in the world in 10 minutes right now, you know, and I do it. I do it every day. People know me. So the point is, I'm seeing the same thing happen. I'm seeing a new kind of tribalism, you know. I'm seeing a new kind of tribalism emerge. I'm being told, you know, I'm not an African because I wasn't born in Nigeria, you know. And I'm looking at my hand and saying, look at my hair, qu'est-ce que c'est? You know, if I'm not an African, what am I? And, you know, Ambassador Chiambori, who you'll meet before you leave, she just made it back into town from New York, so she wants to meet you because she's hearing everything that you're talking about here. But I'm saying, you know, my problem with YALI, I think the IREX, the implementing agency, has done an excellent job. They're highly skilled. I think the management of it, absolutely A+, you know. My issue is, are we doing what we can to make sure that this is a Pan-African vision going forward? No, absolutely not. And I'm seeing African Americans over here. I'm seeing it's about African dynamism, and these are the most dynamic young people you could ever imagine coming across. That's beautiful. I have not met one that I don't think qualified. I can say I haven't met one, you know. But I'm not seeing the African Americans who also walk that walk, meeting them. You know, it's almost like, don't make sure you don't, you know. And I've been doing everything possible to be the radical in the process. And they treat me like this sometimes, you know, because of that. But it's okay. I'm not, you know, you can't take it with you. You can't put it in a U-Haul and haul it to heaven. I don't care. I'm just trying to check out the Dept and John Henry Clark and Leon Sullivan and Nelson Mandela. I'm trying to make sure they're happy. Julius Nyeri. I'm trying to make sure that they're happy with my work. I don't care what these, I don't care. Anyway, that's my point.
I think it's very clear that we've been called to action. I want to close with one final question from the ambassador.
Oh, thank you very much. I like the energy that the youth bring to the room, and that's why I was here. I can feel it, but I wanted to ask one about Raina. I'm quite impressed by what you are doing, but my question was, what's your outreach strategy? How do people, I mean, when I talk of, say, I come from Tanzania. Again, we have the majority are youth, but then they don't have the means. Most of them are maybe in the rural areas. So how do you get access? Talk of accessibility. So I wanted to know this. But also from Jackie, YALI. When it started, I was part of it. Not part of it in the sense that we knew what was going on. One of the, I must say, I don't know, criticism or what about YALI, that the selection has not been very transparent. I was here as ambassador, And then you hear you have youth from Tanzania in town. I said, who are these? But then, of course, I think the government, the US government, not trust our governments to be involved. But then I said, no, for me, I like the youth. I skated around, I knew where they are, and I brought them. And then I had my president in town. So I brought them to the president, and the president said, wow, what did you get? Who are these? These are my youth. I don't even know they are here. Yeah, but then what I want to say, one, of course, I don't know that they have corrected it because 2 years ago they have not followed. But then when you get this youth to the president, what they like is photo opportunity selfie. I said, no, talk issues. Tell them what brings you here. But it's selfies, I know, selfie or whatever, that's what the photo opportunity. But then for you, I see you are very passionate. Why don't you go back and be able to bless everybody on the ground? I don't know whether you are a manager here or a manager in Zimbabwe. I want you back. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I would respond to Mel with just one quote by an elder who was very instrumental in my development. When you talk about the unification, she would tell us all the time that culture is our immune system, and without that, you end up succumbing, or you are very much so compromised. And so when we look at that, as far as us waving the flags and having that separation, when we look at culture, true culture, not what's been imposed and what's been given and what we've been indoctrinated with, culture is our immune system, and that's just the one piece that I continue to stand by and keep in mind. To answer your question around accessibility and how we're reaching them, this is my second year. However, in Ghana, we've been going up to the Liate-Wote region, and it's not necessarily the easiest accessible area, but because of the former summits digitally, people started responding and saying, hey, would you mind coming by and, doing this in Accra? Could you come here and do this, in Techiman and keep going up and further up and go to Kumasi? And then I had somebody reach out and say, we have so many people that are living within this area. We would love for you to come to Liate-Wote because of the development that's already happening here. And so that's really how I've been getting connected. It's been through referrals. It's been through people telling me, we need people here, we need people there. And then not just going and, talking and giving the presentations, it's more of going and training and saying, okay, if this is something that you need, it's not that we have all the answers, but what is it that you need? And let's sit down and let's talk about what would be the most beneficial piece. Allow us to go back and pull on our resources and then bring them back to you and allow them to stay so that you can then have your own trained, skilled people to go and spread that. Because I can't do it alone. The 40 people that have dedicated the time can't do it alone, but as you expressed in the proverb of your father, all those other 98 within the middle, if we each continue to pass that torch and continue to share that knowledge, we can continue to expand it. And so that's the piece. If you have any suggestions on places to go, I'm definitely open. Thank you.
Unfortunately, we'll have to stop the conversation here in the room, but the conversation will obviously continue. I think that we all know that we have been called to action. For the current generation, I think it's very clear. We, the next generation, are demanding our seat at the table. It's time. It's time for you guys to step up and give us what we need to be the leaders of the future. I think it's very clear that for the next generation, first, we have to find the Africa within us. So Dr. Asante said it very clearly. We have to find our Afrocentricity and move forward with that. I lean on the words of Jidenna in saying, don't worry about the headlines. We all have a very powerful piece to play in moving things forward. And beyond this conversation today, we must organize and we must make the diaspora a stronghold to the Africa that we want to see in the future.